Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you all today to our session on the role of knowledge in the energy transition. We are honored today to have with us our guest speaker, Dr. Rabia Ferroukhi. Dr. Rabia Ferroukhi is the director of the Knowledge Policy and Finance Center at the International Renewable Energy Agency, Irena. She oversees the agency's work on knowledge, policy, and finance, including efforts to produce up-to-date and authoritative renewable energy data and information, and also to analyze and to identify the best practices in renewable energy policies and finance. Furthermore, the work of Dr. Ferroukhi includes advice and support to countries, policy tailoring, and investment analysis to renewables deployment in the field. She has over 20 years of experience in the field of energy, development, and environment, working in both public and private sectors, as well as with governments in the Middle East and North Africa, energy companies in the Mediterranean region, and the GCC and international institutions as well. Dr. Ferroukhi holds a master's degree in applied economics and a PhD in economics from the American University in Washington, D.C. We would like to welcome Dr. Ferroukhi again, and I will give the floor to Dr. Ferroukhi. Dr. Rabia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Elsa, for your kind words. And really, it's a pleasure for me to join all of you today in this Knowledge Summit. Obviously, knowledge, data, and analysis is really at the core of the work that we do at Irena, where all this knowledge is then used for informed decision-making in the energy transition towards a sort of more sustainable energy future. So just very briefly, for those who don't know Irena, we're an intergovernmental organization headquartered in Abu Dhabi since 2011. And our mandate is to promote the transformation of the global energy system and the adoption, basically, of all forms of renewable energy. We serve like a knowledge hub, an advisory resource, and the objective global voice for renewable energy. The agency has over 180 countries as members. And of course, we have a lot of global partners to promote and collaborate with in order to support the transition to a better energy future. As was just mentioned, I'm the director of one of the divisions dealing with knowledge, policy, and finance. So,
Dr. Rabia, to interrupt you. I just need to make an announcement for our online audience. Sorry, just one minute. For interpretation and to get the certificates, we kindly ask you, our audience online, to join the link below the video. And for interpretation, if you would like to get the interpretation into Arabic, please hover on the screen and click on the headphones icon and choose Arabic language. Okay, thank you. And sorry, Dr. Rabia.
Not at all, not at all. Thank you very much. So what we're going to look at today in the half hour or so that we have together is what type of knowledge is really needed for the energy transition. When we talk about knowledge for the energy transition, what do we mean? We mean first, one of the questions that we need to answer is where we are today. Where are we today? So what is the current status of the sector? What kind of trends are we seeing? What is the progress that we've made towards achieving certain goals and ambitions? The second area, as you see on the slide, of knowledge and sort of answers the question, where do we want to go? And that means what kind of vision we have for the energy transition over the coming decades, what goals we want to achieve, not only in the longer term, but also in the short term, and especially after the COVID crisis in terms of trying to build back better. And then what are the benefits for society and the economy from such a transition of the energy system? And then the last question we're trying to answer is basically, how do we get there? What kind of environment policies do we need? What kind of investments are required in order to achieve that energy transition and the benefits that could be generated? So we will today look at, of course, we cannot go into great depth, but we will give you some ideas of how to answer some of these questions. So in terms of where we are now, we're going to look at the current status of the sector and some of the trends that we have been seeing. You can see on the slide on data and statistics that we produce, Irena produces a wide range of applied knowledge products and tools that inform decision-making for the energy transition. So we gather data and statistics on different topics that includes energy capacity, power generation, the kind of jobs that you get in the energy transition, the costs, the investments, the patents in terms of intellectual property, etc. We have, for example, the Global Atlas, which I think would be very interesting for many of you, for renewable energy, which is a free web-based platform that provides users with data and tools to assess the renewable energy potential in the country. And we have that not only at the country level, for example, but also at the city level, what kind of renewables you can deploy, at what cost, etc. Now, all of these platforms and databases are freely available to the public because we operate on the principles of knowledge being a public good. So again, we encourage you to go to Irena's website and explore all these resources and understand better how the energy transition is unfolding. Now, in terms of trends, we see that in terms of power capacity, so electricity, we have seen already transformational changes in the way that energy is generated and stored and distributed. So as I said, this is true particularly for the electricity sector, where last year or in 2020, renewables accounted for 82% of all newly installed power capacities. So that means that the remaining 18% are fossil fuel and nuclear in terms of new power addition, which clearly shows that renewables are not a niche. They're, in terms of new capacity available for electricity, very important, the majority of them. And despite the COVID-19 pandemic, more than 260 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity was added globally in 2020, beating previous records by almost 50%. Now, why is this happening? A lot of this is happening in terms of greater deployment and expansion of renewable energy because there have been countries that have introduced policies that supported the uptake of renewables. And this includes countries like Germany with feed-in tariffs, the US, other countries as well. And more recently, we have seen that countries have supported the deployment of renewables, like in the UAE, through auctions. So there are policies that we introduce in order to support a greater deployment of renewables. But another important driver through the past decade is the falling cost of renewables. So renewable power generation has become very competitive. And in many contexts, in majority in contexts, they're less costly than fossil fuel or nuclear-based power generation. Solar PV is has seen the greatest decline in cost over the past decade by 82%. You see that on the slide, and that's followed by concentrated solar power, 47%, onshore wind, 40%, and offshore wind, 29%. Now, of course, this spectacular increase progress has been made in the power sector, but there's still a long way to go in other sectors, in particular heating and cooling, which account for almost half of global energy demand and are responsible for about 40% of CO2 emissions from the energy sector. So there is still a long way to go in order to meet the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals in terms of not increasing global temperatures above 1.5 degrees by 2050. So again, the sectors of heating and cooling and transport are also heavily fossil fuel based. Transport accounts for 30% of energy use. And there, again, just like in heating and cooling, we need a lot of progress to have a greater penetration of renewable energy. Now, in terms of investments into renewable energy, we definitely need a scale up of investment towards investment in clean energy technologies, in particular renewable energy, energy efficiency, power system flexibility, etc. So if you see on the graph now, the global renewable energy investments have increased quite steadily since 2013. They have peaked to 350 billion in 2017 before declining in 2018. Now, the drop in 2018 is really due to the falling technology costs that you have just seen in the former slide, because it allows for a greater capacity to be added with the same amount of investments. Solar PV and onshore wind consolidated their dominance in terms of investment through that period that you see on the slide. And together they account for 75% of renewable energy investment. Now, data is obviously, as you know, very important, and it's also important when it comes to tracking the progress towards achieving energy and climate goals. Measurement and tracking is vital in order to hold not only government, but everyone, all stakeholders accountable and for reassessing different policies and measures that are needed to adjust, that need adjusting in order to further promote deployment of renewables and in general the energy transition. So one of these examples of tracking is the Sustainable Development Goals. Irena is one of the custodian agencies with the 4 other agencies when it comes to tracking the achievement or progress towards SDG 7, which is SDG 7 is achieving, ensuring that we have access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all by 2030. So their renewable energy also plays obviously a very important role to achieve this 2030 agenda. And for example, energy access can help to create new economic opportunities and therefore reduce poverty. And here we're highlighting basically the link that the central role of energy in achieving other sustainable development goals. It helps in electrifying school, which improves education. Clean cooking will reduce respiratory illnesses, and so basically you can see the different linkages that we can achieve by achieving SDG 7 in terms of achieving access to energy. But the problem is that we're not at all on track in terms of achieving the targets under SDG 7. And this is particularly true of the very vulnerable countries as well as those that are already lagging. For example, the number of people without access to electricity fell from 1.2 billion globally in 2010 to 2019. But what happened because of COVID is that these gains are being reversed. So this is just one example of what we have to achieve under SDG 7. But I think the most important point to highlight there is, even though we've made a lot of progress, we're falling behind the objectives of 2030. Now, the second question, as I told you, is where we're aiming to go. So you have a sort of idea of the current status of the sector and where we are now. And now we're going to look at basically where we want to go by focusing obviously on Irena's vision of the energy transition and the renewable energy future. So if you look at this slide, you will see there that we are entering a decade which will be really a defining decade in terms of the chances that we have in keeping temperature rise to 1.5 degree. And this is becoming more and more a reality to people. I mean, I think people are more and more aware of the fact that we have very little time left to change things. And Irena has developed what we have a publication that is called the World Energy Transition Outlook that shows a path toward a more resilient and equitable world, and sort of guides the priorities and the work of Irena, which I will be highlighting. So this outlook towards a more resilient future shows a path that is most likely to reduce emissions in the coming decade and set the trajectory for development with the most promising technologies. It has a timeline and clarity on the steps to be taken to manage the transition from fossil fuels. And it shows that success is possible if the process is inclusive, and that means that it needs the engagement of citizens at the local level to ensure that all countries of the world have an opportunity to keep pace with and benefit in a just and fair way from the transition. So if you look at the investment priorities, so they're renewables, energy efficiency, and electrification, you see the slide from the World Energy Transition Outlook, which shows that pathway to 1.5 degree by 2050. Again, it shows very clearly that the window of opportunity is narrow, and therefore we really need to prioritize the technologies that are available today so they can be deployed at scale by 2030, and therefore make a meaningful shift towards a net zero energy system by 2050. So the analysis we have finds that renewables, efficiency, and electrification really provide the bulk of emission abatement by 2050. The most important shift is the increasing use of low-cost renewable power to electrify end uses we would just talk about, which is basically heating, cooling, and transport. And we also increasingly talk about green hydrogen as being one of the key solutions as well to this pathway. In terms of investment, Irena's 1.5 scenario shows that we require an additional $33 trillion over the planned investment from today over to 2050. Now, Irena has also been analyzing the broader potential benefits of renewables since the early days of the agency. You can see on the slide all the different kinds of reports we have been publishing over the past decade that have focused on how renewables can provide benefits, wider benefits, while adding value to local economies. So I'm not going to go into them, but just to summarize, we assess existing renewable energy jobs worldwide. We measure the expected socioeconomic impacts of the deployment of this energy transition up to the year 2050. And this is done through an econometric model that we have. We analyze how to leverage domestic capacity through local supply chain development and related measures, and therefore ensure that there is a local value that is created. And you have probably seen throughout the pandemic that the discussion around global supply chain has become very important, because we saw during the pandemic that this became a problem. And then we examine ways to ensure that the benefits are shared widely, including for skills that are rendered obsolete in the conventional energy sector, for example, or also by looking at the gender dimension, etc. So this is, all these aspects are very important to our member governments, because if they're trying to promote renewables and energy efficiency and the energy transition in general in their country, they need to have evidence on how renewables can provide wider benefits to their societies while adding value to local economies. So if we look at the socioeconomic footprints that I just spoke about, basically what we do is look at these technologies that the energy transition is going to implement, and we see what kind of impact it has on variables like GDP, jobs, welfare, and how it affects basically societies and economies. So here you see some example of the results for 2030, the pathway that we propose, which is one that leads us to a 1.5 degree temperature increase by 2050, would boost GDP by 2.4%, above what would be the case under current plans and strategy. So it means that going a more ambitious pathway in terms of sustainability is going to actually improve GDP. And we see also that welfare is also much better. The results on the welfare impacts are very, very high with this more ambitious strategy. We also estimate that a lot of jobs will be created. In terms of renewable energy jobs, we see that by 2030, we will have 43 million renewable energy jobs, and some of the numbers you can get on our website. All the publications that we have are available for free on our website, and so all these numbers you can get from what you see here, the VETO, the World Energy Transition Outlook. Now, how will we get there? I'm very sorry, I muted myself. So now the third question that we're answering is, how do we get there, basically? And of course, there's a lot to do, but we sort of have the technologies. And if we're only looking at 2030, as I just said, we should be looking at the technologies that are already available and how to scale up their deployment. So in this remaining 10 years, let's say to 2030, achieving these objectives of 2030, so we have a chance of making 2050, what can we do? Basically, we need political will, obviously, and policies and measures that can help us achieve that transition, and at the same time provide the benefits to society at large. And if you see the next slide is about this sort of comprehensive policy framework that is needed for the just energy transition, for an energy transition first, but also a just energy transition. So obviously, we will continue to need deployment policies that have helped until now, like, as I mentioned before, feed-in tariffs that have been used, auctions, have targets, etc. But beyond that, we will also need a comprehensive policy framework that considers people, prosperity, and planet, as you can see on this slide. This is where I think Irena provides a unique value. We have had the privilege to work with countries from all corners of the world. As I said, we have or over 170 countries that are member of Irena. And we gain a lot of insights across a range of transition issues in very different kind of contexts in terms of geographies, economies, societies. So this rich policy knowledge base has really provided guidance on the different types of policies that are needed to deploy the energy transition pathway that we recommend and maximize socioeconomic benefits. And policies to support the growing deployment and integration of renewable energy, so the ones I just spoke about, must go hand in hand with measures that ensure that industrial and other economic capabilities are aligned with the development and climate objectives. So you need effective labor market intervention that can match jobs with qualified applicants, promote the employee well-being, facilitate on and off-job training towards renewable energy and energy employment, and other energy transition type of employment. And implementing, of course, also job safety nets with the measures to facilitate labor mobility, etc. We also need proactive just transition strategies to minimize socioeconomic disruptions through targeted public investments and economic diversification measures for affected regions and communities. And as you know, many countries, including in the region, have been doing so to diversify their economies and prepare for a sustainable future where they would have a role to play in terms of even as energy leaders. Another aspect which we will talk about again in 2 minutes is also targeted educational and skills development policies and programs that can allow workers to take full advantage of the job opportunities that come with energy transition. Also reduce or avoid the mismatch that can happen between skill demand and supply. Also retrain fossil fuel workers into the new kinds of jobs that will have that the energy transition will generate. So all these policies support that I spoke about, all of them together support the structural shifts that the energy transition brings with it, and makes sure that people and communities can thrive, and that economies are more inclusive, just, and resilient. So what do we need financially in terms of financing as far as this is concerned? I'm not going to go too much into detail, but you can see on the slide that that we need financing, obviously, but the financing that we have received for the energy transition, the world has received for the energy transition to date, is nowhere near enough. We need a lot more. From the global climate flows that we've received in 2018-19 of about over $600 billion, two-thirds went to renewables. But for example, finance for adaptation has only been 46 billion. The financing needs are really estimated to $5 trillion a year, including both mitigation and adaptation. So we will need a lot more financing, both from the public and the private sector. We also need a greater commitment from the from the international community. For example, at COP15, COP15 in 2009, developed countries had made pledges to mobilize $100 billion a year of climate finance to developing countries. The target has never been met. The good news is that COP26, and hopefully this will be implemented. There were a lot of pledges that were made, and as well as a substantial reduction of financing into coal, and also a pledge to double global adaptation finance. So it's now projected that the $100 billion per year will be met in 2023 and maybe exceeded later. So the the point is that what we need to do is really make sure that that we scale up our ambitions and put the financing where is needed. If you look at NDCs, that's the next slide. The NDCs are commitments that countries make to basically combat climate change. 2021, 194 countries have submitted their nationally determined contribution to the Paris Agreement. Out of those, 151 had submitted new or updated the contributions. And within those 150 new submitted NDCs, 91 parties, that's what they're called, submitted more than 60% of global GHG emission. So collectively, 90 parties have introduced commitments that would reduce global GHG emissions by over 60%. And that's how they enhance their ambitions compared to the previous NDCs. Then there are another 60 parties that accounted for 18% of global emissions that submitted also greater ambitions to get the same emission reductions or increased emissions compared to their first NDCs. And the remaining countries or parties intend to submit NDCs or have provided no indication to submit them. That's about 20% of the global GHG emission. I think the most important here to maybe keep in mind is that 90 parties that provided their contribution, they have enhanced or their ambitions or increased their ambitions, which would account for more than 60% of global emission reduction. So I think important to know also is that the G20 members account for about 75% of our global GHG emissions. And that out of these 20, 19 have submitted new or updated NDCs, and 11 only countries submitted stronger pledges than the original one. So a lot more has to be done. And then obviously you have a lot of countries that submit pledges like LDCs and SIDS, and they're just really responsible for very, very, very minor part or share of the global GHG emissions. For the case of LDCs and SIDS, it's about 7% of global greenhouse gas emissions, as I said, compared to the G20 countries, which together accounts for 75% of total emissions. So that's something to keep in mind in terms of what countries should be doing. Now, so with this greater urgency to safeguard the future of our planet, we're seeing more and more countries, cities, companies setting net zero targets for their greenhouse gas emissions over the coming years or decades. Obviously, if this shift towards a greener economy is happening, then we will have a very different world to the one we see today. And this will have major implication on the world of work or employment and future skilling demands. And this is why we have on the next slide the shift to renewable energy that will create new jobs and opportunities for workers, their families, their communities. So it's important to develop a workforce that is inclusive and where people of different backgrounds, including women who currently are 32% of the labor force, and other underrepresented groups can benefit or contribute to this sort of greener economy.
So you can see on the slide that renewable energy will require people with many different kind of skills and occupational backgrounds. There's individuals that will be required with the degrees in STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. That's about 30% of the required labor force. Another 5% in non-technical professional fields like lawyers, logistic experts, marketing professionals, expert in regulation and standardization, etc. But what is very interesting is like many of the jobs, or most of the jobs, actually a majority of the job, will not require university degrees. Instead, they will require skills that are built through different pathways, including vocational training, apprenticeship, on-the-job training, etc. And so building the skills needed for the energy transition while promoting a knowledgeable citizenry with informed voters, consumers, and decision makers is really what is key over the coming decades. And this is why Irena is launching a new global platform on education and training for the energy transition, which will bring together different international partners, including UNESCO and education and institutions, to identify skilling needs, to develop curricula, train educators, exchange best practices in renewable energy education. And this platform, particularly the efforts that we're making on Educate the Educators initiative, is being supported by the government of the United Arab Emirates. So building capacity of young people is also vital to address current and future knowledge and skills needs. I mean, there are shortages of skills needed for jobs within the energy transition already now. And this is why Irena has created a number of platforms to engage with and educate youth, including the Irena Youth Forum, the Global Council on Enabling Youth Action for SDG 7, and the Irena Student Leaders Program, which is a 3-month virtual training for university students. Now, since its inception, Irena has, as you may have seen from the earlier graph, on the different linkages that SDG 7 has. So energy is not an end in itself, achieving as SDG 7, but it's what it allows us to achieve more broadly in terms, as I said, of education, in terms of poverty eradication, in terms of other aspects, other SDGs. And this is what you see on this graph. Since its inception, Irena has really taken a holistic approach to the energy transition, looking at the interlinkages with the other energy sectors, and with society, with the economy. And this includes the nexus between energy and food, given that the world's food system accounts for about 30% of the global energy consumption, and 2.5 billion people globally rely on agriculture for their livelihoods. So we started a few years ago with a publication on renewable energy and the water, energy, and food nexus, where we place renewable energy at the center of the nexus with water and food, and see the opportunities that exist to integrate renewables in agriculture and the water sector, and identify potential trade-offs and sustainability risks that can emerge. Since then, we have expanded a lot on this work stream to look at knowledge work and policy analysis, like the ecosystems that are required to link energy supply with livelihood application, technology-specific analysis like solar irrigation, geothermal heat in agriculture, etc. Quantify the socioeconomic benefits or impacts and the environmental ones. We've done a lot on gathering data and statistics, which, as I said, is important to track progress, but also there's just data missing. So we didn't have very little on off-grid data, solar pumps, the use of biogas for cooking, etc. We have also looked at regional agri-value chain assessment to see how we can identify in certain region the energy gaps in specific sectors like in dairy, vegetable value chain, and see how renewables can address some of those gaps. And then, of course, advocacy that we do with different institutions like with UN FAO, Food Systems Summit, etc. In order to the Coalition for Action, with which is also a platform in Irena, in order to look at agri-renewables. So beyond agriculture, Irena is really looking extensively at that, as I said, this ecosystem that is required to scale up the use of renewables and strengthen the livelihoods and support delivery of public services such as health and healthcare. So as I just mentioned, there is this Irena Coalition for Action, which I invite you to, you can look at the website that we have, where we have a lot of activities that I mentioned earlier, and where we really try to bring on board all sorts of stakeholders, whether academia, industry association, private sector, NGOs, etc., in order to maximize the impact and look at some of the listen to other voices and try to provide the best information and the best policy recommendation to member states. And to the sector. We have in this Irena Coalition 120 leading renewable energy players. There are different working groups. I'm not going to go into it, but you can have it in the slide. We look at the renewable energy investment, how citizens can be empowered to participate in decision making, how to decarbonize those sectors that I told you are difficult, where like transport and heating and cooling, etc. I'm going to go through, maybe just to mention also there is one working group on jobs where we're working with ILO to advocate a just and inclusive energy transition. Maybe just to finish on a couple of things. I just wanted to conclude by speaking about the important role of knowledge-based decision making, which is at the heart, I think, of your forum, and the policies in the energy transition. And as you saw, we're currently the world is responding to a difficult health crisis, where we're again reminded of the critical role of affordable and renewable and reliable energy across all kinds of sectors, as I said, in particular health right now. And we see practical examples of how meeting renewable development, meeting SDG 7, Sustainable Development Goal 7, contributes directly and indirectly to basically most other SDGs. So now as we're trying to recover from the pandemic and build a more inclusive and sustainable economy, we have to be really conscious of the interconnected nature of our energy system. And this complete transformation of the energy system will have ripple effects across sectors. And this is why we need this holistic approach that I mentioned in the earlier on, with this globe, including the planet, the economy, and the society, in order to have a smooth transition and in order to really maximize socioeconomic benefits and advance the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, but also to ensure that these benefits that can be generated from the energy transition are distributed in a more equal fashion, because it could very well be that the energy transition could generate benefits such as the winners of today could be the winners of tomorrow. We need to have for that, we need to address the structural this misalignments and the structural realities that have brought inequality in the world in terms of economic benefit and social benefits. And we cannot continue to have them embedded in the energy transition. So we need to address them with the energy transition. So finally, just one last slide in terms of knowledge building is to highlight many of the data and reports that I've made reference to today. And again, they're free to access and download on the Irena website. I have just spoken of one little part of our work. There's a lot of work on technology, on partnerships, on finance that you can find on the website, and that could be of interest to you depending on the topics that you want to address. And I would like to thank my colleague who is with me today, Samah, who is working a lot on creating all these knowledge platforms. And she's the person basically leading on all the youth education and training programs at Irena for all her efforts. And you can always get in touch with her in order to learn more. And she's with me. She can also answer some of the questions that you have on this. So thank you again very much, Samah, and thank you for inviting us and inviting Irena. And thank you, Dr. Elsa, for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rabia, for a very, really informative presentation and to get to know more about the work done by Irena in the field of energy transition. I will just ask you one question before I move to the question from our audience online, because we ended with knowledge. So what do you think are some of the specific knowledge needs and priorities in the energy access context? Your mic, please.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was muted. I'm very sorry. Yeah, so I'm not sure I mentioned the number, but there's about over 750 million people around the world that don't have access to energy. So obviously addressing this issue is one of the key pillars of Irena's work. And we conduct analysis in order to build a knowledge base, gather, as I said, a lot of the data that doesn't exist for the access world, and make a recommendation to accelerate the deployment of renewables in the off-grid context in particular. And there, we have already gathered a series of data on off-grid, which is very, very interesting, and we're the only ones who have it at this point in time. But also, we've gathered a lot of knowledge and best practice in terms of policies. So we work through various platforms, different collaborations, capacity building activities, knowledge products in general, to bring these different best practices, as I said, together. And again, we look a lot on the design and implementation of enabling policies. What kind of tailored financing schemes and innovative business models and technology applications for both standalone and mini grids that can be implemented. And as I said earlier, we look at this ecosystem that is needed to support livelihoods. So that means access to finance. How do you de-risk tools and introduce conducive ownership models in the access context? What are the efficient technologies that cater to specific needs? For example, we have a very nice publication on livelihoods. For the bottom of the pyramid, very often this is a part of very basic technology that is helping a lot of people in their livelihoods that nobody looks at, except of course certain institutions. And we were lucky to work with Selco in India for repurposing of very basic technology with renewables to really improve livelihoods. How to access new and or existing markets to sell products, how important integrated research planning is for the national level policies and targets, and how to look at those interlinkages, for example, as I just mentioned about the healthcare facilities. For example, you should know that 1 billion people today rely on health facilities without electricity supply. And there we also have very important initiatives with WHO that looks at how to electrify rural health centers. So that's a little bit what we have, but of course we have a lot more which you can access on the website, or just write to us and we will be very happy to reply.
Thank you. We can see that Irena has really, it's a very rich source of knowledge in terms if you want to make and achieve successfully the transition in terms of energy. So thank you. I will take another question from our audience online. The first question we have, what is the future of renewable energy and environmental protection in light of crisis, as well as the level of compliance with environmental agreements?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a very nice question. Obviously, like any technology, and I think the person is probably referring, okay, there's different aspects to the question. One is the future of renewable energy. I mean, I think the future of renewable energy is obvious. It's not a niche anymore in electricity, as we've seen in the presentation, but it's moving also to other sectors of the economy, heating, cooling, transport at a much slower pace, but given consideration of energy security, which is something that we've always spoken about. Obviously, it's picking up. It has been picking up for a while, but also in terms of climate change necessity, right? That's another reason why renewables and energy efficiency will increasingly play a very big role. But the question is very relevant also in terms of basically the environmental footprint of renewable energy as well. And that's a very important consideration. We are working on these. For example, we're looking at circular economy, but we're also looking at end-of-life renewable energy technology. So we're looking specifically this year at PV. We did a study 4 or 5 years ago around what can we do with PV waste. Because obviously some of the PV plants are coming to end of life soon. So what do we do with that? How do we recycle the waste, and what can we do with it? So we've done that already 4 or 5 years ago, but we're renewing this. One important aspect for that is regulation. At the time when we looked at it, we only saw regulations mostly in the US, which was mostly voluntary, but a lot in the European Union countries. And regulation is a very important aspect of that in order to recycle the waste from renewable energy. Another aspect that we're looking at, and this is going to come in our forthcoming report on called, you saw, the World Energy Transitions Outlook, where we look at rare minerals and how to deal with those. As you know, very few countries have a lot, they're very concentrated. So we have to see not only in terms of those countries supplying the raw material, but also what those countries can gain themselves from adding value in their economy from those, and not be mere producers of commodities that are exported to the outside world, but how they can also gain value from it, and how that fits within environmental standards, etc. But absolutely right, these are all questions that we deal with, and they are real questions, because we cannot look only at life cycle and footprints of conventional energy, conventional energy sources, but we also have to look at those in renewables.
Yeah, so we can say that we're really on the right. We would be able to recycle all I would say the solar panels coming from this energy, from renewable energy. We will get there, and we'll be able to protect the environment at the same time.
So to which extent we can recycle everything, I'm not sure. We will tell you in a couple of months how far it is, but a majority, yes, a majority, and that's for PV panels. We're doing the same study for batteries. A lot of the there is a lot of literature on wind, and that. Same thing. A large part of the equipment, etc., can be recycled. So yeah, which doesn't mean that there is not a part that cannot be recycled or that needs further research and development in order to see what we can do with that. But yeah, these are not questions that are unanswered at this point. There are solutions, and with time, yes, I think that a lot can be done in terms of recycling and moving into the circular economy approach.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. I will move now to a question about finance. What are the sources and mechanisms of financing for renewable energy projects in the private sector, especially small and medium enterprise and businesses?
Yeah, so, okay, as I said earlier, we need a lot more finance. It is estimated that the share of public finance is about 15% for renewables, I'm talking, and the rest should come from the private sector. So this is a global number, and it's not really true everywhere. So you will find, for example, we just have a report that we just launched on Africa, where obviously the public share of financing is much, much bigger than that. And so it will depend on the country conditions, on the perceived or real risk of financing, etc. But same thing, I mean, whether it's, and those are a lot of large scale projects. For the smaller kind of project, if that's the question, there's a lot of different facilities, funding facilities that we can draw from. And again, I don't think it is clear from the finance world that it's not, they claim that it is not a lack of finance, but it's a lack of projects, that is sort of hampering greater investments. So I think facilitating project development in terms of pre-feasibility studies, of matching developers with financiers, with technology providers, etc., is very important, especially for smaller projects. And aggregating smaller projects is another important step. And Irena itself has a facility, ETAF, which provides this kind of facilitation, and we can share with you again some, and you can find on the website also. We have a pipeline of projects that we try to facilitate in terms of finding financiers and project developers, but there are other such funds that can facilitate projects and provide the financing needed. But definitely a lot of work is needed on that, and that's where I think the enabling framework is also important in terms of policies and sort of conducive investment environment for private sector to engage more.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rabia. We don't have a lot of time anymore, but I will just take the last question, the third and last question from our audience. What is the importance of imposing tax penalties on companies that destroy the environment, and the role of knowledge in reducing greenhouse gas emissions to protect future generations?
Yeah, I think it's essential. The carbon pricing is, I think, what the person means. So carbon pricing is a very important policy that many countries have introduced. Now the discussion is about the level of carbon price, etc., and which countries to do it. This is where international cooperation is very important, especially that certain countries, as I said earlier, are not really responsible for a lot of the emissions that we have today. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't all make an effort in that direction. So carbon pricing is important, and taxing companies that pollute is essential, obviously, as well. And I think we have, as I said earlier, a very narrow window to come to take the right decisions. And those are two examples of policies, but there are many others, fiscal policies, and at the same time redistribution. But fiscal policy can be very important, but also our deployment policies, etc., in order to make sure that that we don't leave to future generation a planet they cannot breathe in.
Yeah, thank you. This is very important, not to end up at the same point with a fossil fuel in terms of pollution, or not really being able to have an environmental friendly new energy transition in terms of structure. So I want to thank you. I just want to close. So with Dr. Rabia, we have seen she has provided us information about the renewable energy frameworks for energy transition, the socioeconomic benefits of a transformed energy system. She has also tapped on the education and the knowledge needs in this energy transition phase. And also at the end, we talked about renewable energy in the post-COVID recovery agenda. So what we need really is a structural shift when we talk about policy, and even when we talk about industry and education and building skills. It's evident that we need more financing in here. And to reach the net zero energy system by 2050, apparently we need $33 trillion to reach this point. So I would like, and if you need to know more about this, you can access Irena website and platforms where you can find a lot of information and knowledge products on the website. So I would like to thank you again, Dr. Rabia, and also I thank all our audience with the interesting questions that were addressed to us. Sorry for the question that we couldn't cover, but maybe we can follow up with you offline. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us. Thank you. Bye-bye.